When the one with the rifle gets killed, the one who is following picks up the rifle and shoots!
Welcome to the 6th episode of the Pick Up the Rifle and Shoot series, featuring my SAIGA IZ-132, my very first AK. She was made in the famous Russian IZHMASH factory of Mikhail Kalashnikov, in which she started as a sporter with a hunting stock, a move-back trigger group, non-threaded barrel, one-piece handguard, and only functioned with proprietary magazines. SAIGAs were inexpensive back then, coming in various calibers, and they became popular conversion projects, especially converting them to the famous AK-100 series, as SAIGAs were pretty much sporterized versions of them. And this is the way to get a real Russian-made AK. So here she is, my converted SAIGA IZ-132 in 7.62x39. It took me 5 years to convert her to how she looks today, with a lot of trial and error, yelling, and a lot of cussing. Converting the SAIGA IZ-132 can be quite expensive, especially if you want it to be AK-103 correct, but I decided to go through a more economical approach and do it myself, using conversion parts from Carolina Shooter Supply, which included a trigger guard, bullet guide, a lower handguard retainer, and a barrel threading kit, and I'll go over all the parts I used in detail. I'll go ahead and clear the weapon and do a quick function check. First up is the fixed aluminum triangle stock from Circle 10 AK, which installed perfectly with no issues. I wrapped the butt end with paracord and rounded off the edges to make it more comfortable, and I tied a piece of paracord for my 1-point sling. Next up is the whole trigger assembly that I moved forward. I used the Tapco G2 trigger group, a Carolina Shooter Supply bolt-on trigger guard, and painted the underside with black duplicolor engine enamel DE1634, which matched the original finish perfectly. The magazine release was also filed down to accept standard AK magazines. On the top, I replaced the rear sight with a 1000-meter Russian rear sight. I then replaced the gas tube with one from an Arsenal SGL, and used a Khyber Customs Swiss Grater handguard. The lower handguard is from a Bulgarian AK-74, held onto place with a Carolina Shooter Supply bolt-on handguard retainer. I also wrapped the sling loop with some paracord, as I'd like to place my thumb on there for added grip. Next is the front sight block. I removed the barrel shroud with a pipe cutter and threaded the barrel using the 14x1 left-hand kit from Carolina Shooter Supply. I then used the JMAC Customs AIMR Flash Hider and timed it with Gemtech Spacers with red Loctite for peace of mind. Now let's go flip her onto the other side. Here's another view of the stock. It's also slightly shorter than the standard Warsaw stock, which is a plus, as it allows you to get more square with the rifle when shouldering. And lastly, to finish the conversion, I used a standard polymer pistol grip from Arsenal. I also wrapped it in a bicycle tube for added grip. In summary, I am very happy with the look of my SAIGA IZ132 conversion. I've had no issues with all the parts used for the conversion, and they are holding up quite well. The labor involved for me was quite extensive, but I learned a lot about my AK, of how it operates, how the parts work together, and gained a deeper appreciation for Mikhail Kalashnikov's masterpiece. She is definitely quite something. On top of the conversion, I also did modifications that are definitely worth mentioning and worth showing. So let's see what's under the hood. As I said, I am very happy with the look of my SAIGA conversion, but the performance is also just as important. So let's go take a closer look. Up first, you can see how the trigger guard bolts on and how far the trigger group had to come forward for the conversion. Next, you can see the bullet guide installed in front of the barrel, which allows the use of standard AK magazines. I then rounded off the trigger hammer, as Tapco G2s are notorious for the bolt dragging and deforming the tail of the bolt carrier. It also smoothed out the action tremendously. Next is the bolt carrier. I replaced the stock gas piston with a K&S adjustable gas piston version 2. AKs are generally over gas, and this K&S piston allows you to dial it in, resulting in less perceived recoil, less wear and tear, and shells not being launched into outer space. Installation on the SAIGA was difficult due to the stock piston being crimped on, instead of having a standard AK piston rivet. I had to drill out the crimps and then drill through the K&S piston to install a piston rivet. I then grinded it down flush and blued the surrounding exposed metal. The K&S piston does an incredible job controlling my overgas SAIGA, as shells were originally being launched toward 20 to 30 feet. After I adjusted the K&S at 9 clicks, they now land about 8 to 10 feet in about a 2 PM pattern, with felt recoil being noticeably reduced. You'll be able to see this in all my shooting portions of this video. And lastly is the recoil spring that I changed to an ALG. I had this ALG spring before the K&S piston installed and really couldn't tell a difference versus the standard recoil spring when shooting. However, I did notice that the bolt was harder to cycle and the bolt slammed back to the front trunnion with a lot more force. But so far so good. Now let's go see how she shoots. Off to the 25-yard range. I zeroed my SAIGA the same way as I do with my other AKs and Mosins. Put the rear sight at 2 and adjust the front sight until all the rounds hit center mass, point of aim, point of impact at 25 yards. After adjusting the front sight and the K&S piston to 9 clicks from close, I shot 5 rounds to confirm my zero. As you can see, all 5 rounds hit the center of the target with no issues at all. With the K&S piston perfectly tuned, shells were ejecting in a controlled manner, and also the recoil impulse was significantly less. Now let's see how she does at 200 yards. With the sights untouched from my 25-yard zero, I proceeded to shoot 5 rounds using a 6 o'clock hold. The rain was coming down hard, and luckily it stopped just for a little bit and gave me enough time for this one shooting session before coming right back and ending my range day. The The target I'm using is the NRA-C 200-yard target, which has a 13-inch black circle. I also put a shoot-and-see 12-inch circle target so I can see my hits on my spotting scope. I went downrange to confirm what I saw in my spotting scope, a 7.62x39 group. The elevation was spot on except for the first round, and I knew I messed that one up. My breathing was way off. And as for the windage, I was hitting just to the left. I'm not going to adjust the sights just yet. For the purpose of this video is to measure what the rifle is capable of and what I'm capable of, and 5 rounds isn't enough. So back to the firing line and load up another 5 rounds. As you can see, 3 of the rounds hit the same area from the first group, and with that data, I can conclude that my converted SAIGA IZ-132 can do 3.8 MOA at 200 yards with the ammo that I'm using, Wolf WPA Military Classic 124 grain. Shooting 10 rounds gives me an honest measurement of my capability with the ammo that I'm using. I'll measure 8 out of 10 rounds, 80%, the same way as my previous videos, allowing 2 for shooter errors, flyers, and outliers. I know I can definitely do better with more trigger time, but I can't fight Mother Nature as she soaked all my gear and rifle. So it is what it is. Now let's see how she does at Texas Kalashnikov, Comrade Iron's division. This clip is from my Stage 2, the Ka. Starting with both hands on the wheel, at the beep, retrieve your rifle on the trunk, load, and make ready. Then move forward to the barricade, and with the rifle touching it, knock 3 balls off their stand, and you must change position after each knockoff. Then you would have to neutralize 4 silhouette brown targets by putting 2 rounds in each on the far left and the far right. And there is a twist. You do have to have at least 1 mandatory reload between the first shot and the last. Then, at the last part is to move forward and knock off 2 wood blocks on the left and the right. For the Comrade Irons division, Stage 2, I placed 5th out of 12 competitors. My SAIGA performed very well in all the remaining stages with no malfunctions or issues. However, for me, Stage 2 was the only good run I had, even with 1 penalty. The rest had a lot of user errors. So there you have it, my converted SAIGA IZ-132. Not only capable in shooting for groups, but also in a match with a lot of running and gunning. Converting the SAIGA was a challenging process, but definitely had a big reward, and being my first AK makes it all the more special. I'll definitely shoot her again in another match, and possibly again at 200 yards, weather permitting. Till then, thanks for watching.